welcome everybody. I am Helene Granqvist. I'm the president of WIFTI International, and I have the honor to moderate this conversation today. So most welcome all of you. This will be the third WIFTI worldwide webinar. Last week we were in Vancouver, the week before in Iceland. And I also would like to promote that in June, we will first travel to Australia, then to India, and finally to Los Angeles. But today we are in the Lake District in UK. So hello, Rebecca. Welcome to WIFTI Worldwide Webinar.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We are so happy to have you as our guest today. And just to give some framework to our little audience today, that me and Rebecca will have a chat for about 30 minutes. And we encourage all of you to write your name and names and where you're from in the comment field, so we can see who's visiting. And we also encourage you, there is a box in the bottom where there says Q&A. If you have questions for Rebecca, please write your questions there. So after 30 minutes, we have behind the red WIFTI sign, or red and white WIFTI sign, Regina, who is the fantastic person who works with WIFTI membership and communication. She will moderate the questions. So please write your questions in the little Q&A box. So welcome everyone. And my first question to you, Rebecca, you has been a producer for quite a while, a documentary producer, creative producer.
Yes.
Yeah. Some years ago, you decided to also open up for another part of your work life. Can you tell us what happened?
Oh, there's so many elements to this, but yeah, I've been producing for about 12 years, mostly working with the Scottish Documentary Institute, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And I was just kind of working my way up, you know, all the different production roles and doing a bit of producing and a bit of impact producing. So working both on developing projects, but also getting very heavily involved in the impact work, the kind of outreach, audience engagement side of things on projects that my colleague Sonia Henrizi at SDI was producing at the time. So mostly I Am Breathing and 7 Songs for a Long Life. I think I Am Breathing we released in 2030, so it was a long time ago, and those 2 films were about broadly were about death and dying, and I was the sort of point of contact between the filmmaking community and the community of people impacted by, you know, either being in hospice care or caring for somebody who was in hospice care. So it just opened up a whole new world to me, a whole new way of communicating. So there were 2 things that I was really aware of. One, that I got a lot of joy from that work, and the other, that I was really unprepared for it. So I could feel that it was something I was very drawn towards, but also thinking, documentary makers are doing this kind of stuff all the time with very little preparation, you know, just around the language that we use, or how do we decompress at the end of the day after speaking to people for the entire day who are suffering from terminal illness. But then I was thinking, you know, there's so many other issues that we feel that we deal with on over a really long period of time. You know, if you're a director, you could be making a film on an issue of that gravity for years. So that was where it all sort of started back then, and then I made the move to the Lake District when I met my partner a few years ago, and I was going freelance. So the other side of the coin was that I didn't want to work at the level that I was seeing my fellow producers working at to make a living. knowing that I eventually wanted to raise a family, and my partner doesn't work in film, and I just wanted to see him sometimes and earn a living.
Yeah. At that time, Rebecca, did you have an idea that you should combine your producing with the therapists?
Sort of, but it wasn't fully formed. I knew that I had a feeling that there could be something there, but at that point we weren't talking about mental health in the film industry.
When did you start to
Um,
talk about mental health in the film industry?
sorry,
Yes.
when probably only a couple of years ago, I think. Really, I mean, when I started my training in 2016, and even at that point as a therapist, and even at that point I didn't tell anyone what I was doing apart from my really close friends, because I felt there were two things. I felt like I didn't know how it would be received at that point. I was worried that I might be stepping on toes, but also I didn't want people to not take me seriously as a producer. And I was still working under that illusion that you won't get work unless you're seen to be 100% driven in that one thing, in what you're doing. So there were both of those things. There's a bit of my own insecurity and a bit of like, I'm not really sure how people are going to receive talking about mental health, and I don't have those problems at all anymore. The first
What
time
made a change, not having that problem anymore? What has changed, do you think, for
I
you?
I felt more confident when I had my qualification, that I actually was then I'd done a lot of the thinking, so I'd made the connections on a more profound level rather than just a kind of wondering level. But all of my essays at uni during my training were about my documentary work. I really brought that into my therapeutic training, of just trying to think things through and suss things out, and really making the connection between how documentary makers are working in a therapeutic way without any structure to support them, and what I was learning as a therapist, in terms of my own self-care and the systems that were in place to help us think about ethics and to help us think about just how to look after ourselves in our profession, and how to look after the people that we were working with. Because I think, it's not just filmmakers working in a role that is seen to be feels very therapeutic in my mind, like holding somebody else's vulnerability, but it's also, how do you then take care of that vulnerable person, because that's our responsibility too in many ways.
And yourself, I think.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if you should describe how you work today, because now you mix your producing and therapy, they
Mm.
go together. So could you give us a picture of what you're doing today, and how many percent of what, and just we have an overview.
Yeah, it's been shifting I launched this a couple of years ago and then had a baby quite swiftly afterwards. So it's sort of been shifting and building up as the months go by. But I'm still producing one feature and one short, because they were going. The feature I started before I even started my training. You all know how long it takes. um, and and then I think I would say about 70% of my work is working with film clients. So I work as a therapist. I use the therapeutic hour to kind of structure the work that I do, and I leave it very open to each client, each filmmaker, about how they want to use that hour. So some people are really focused on working through their projects and problem solving, almost like mental health risk assessments for themselves and for the people they're filming with. And then other people don't bring their projects at all, they bring themselves, and that what's going on for them personally, what drove them into filmmaking in the first place, how to manage that blurring of the lines between who you are as a you know, before you were a filmmaker and who you are now as a filmmaker. It's every person I work with teaches me something new. It's so varied.
Yeah. Yeah, now you said it was something new, so maybe my question would be strange, but I was thinking, is there a pattern you can see, any specific problems that you see in our industry?
Yes, there are patterns. Definitely not one pattern. It's interesting how when I come on and do panels like this and workshops, because I do workshops and training around mental health as well, it's interesting how often the conversation ends up being around sustainability, or, you know, the sort of the struggles that filmmakers experience working at this level and not getting paid enough. That often becomes a big focus of the conversation, but when I'm working one-to-one with clients, it very rarely is. It's an issue, but it's something that they leave behind, kind of, that's an industry structural problem that we're not going to solve in this therapy session. So what we're looking at then are feelings of self-worth. We're looking at creative blocks a lot of the time. You know, a lot of phrases I hear often are, I've lost my film and I don't know, you know, I don't know how to find it again because I've got so distracted or caught up in the pressure of actually trying to raise the finance and getting the thing made that I've forgotten why I'm making it in the first place. So we spend a lot of time going back to the beginning and rediscovering. I think people often come to me at the end of when they're nearing the end of a project, and it's that kind of gathering everything together to find the energy to then put it out into the world. Yeah, and then other times it's after the project has finished, and I think that's what we often don't have time to do as filmmakers, is to actually process how painful or difficult something was during the years of filming, and the impact that's left on us.
When we talked the other day to prepare ourselves for this conversation, and we will of course talk about the current situation, but then you said something that filmmakers in general has been better than a lot of other people to deal with this current.
I lost the last part of that.
Yeah. You were frozen for a bit. You know, when we talked, you said this current unsafe situation with COVID. You told me that you think that filmmakers has in general been better than a lot of other people to deal with this unsafe situation. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I guess I said that because that's what I've been hearing from filmmakers. I've been partly, and it was a wondering of, are we better equipped, you know, to deal with this, because we're so used to uncertainty. I think, you know, we're so used to not knowing where the next paycheck's coming from, and not knowing what the future looks like, really, because I think one of the things that draws us into this world is the unpredictability of it. You know, if we were the types of people that needed stability and needed to know exactly what we were doing every day, I'm not sure we'd be making documentaries. So there's something about our resourcefulness in that moment. You know, the adrenaline that hit us all probably felt very much like trying to get a funding application in, or, you know, when you've just got a new story and you're like, oh my God, this is happening, this is going to start. So there's something in that there. But interestingly, I have noticed a massive increase of people getting in touch for support, whereas in my private practice, because I also see clients who are not filmmakers face to face here in Kendal, that's really reduced. You know, people are not looking for therapy right now because they're just surviving. They're just in survival mode, and they're not doing anything else apart from just figuring out how to get through all of this. Whereas filmmakers are also there, but they're really attending to their own professional needs right now, maybe because they're not in production. They actually have the time to say, oh, I've been putting that off for months, but I do need to speak to a therapist, or, you know, I do need to just touch base with somebody to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And of course, even if we are an industry that are well prepared to crisis in a way, doesn't mean people don't feel bad right now, because a lot of things has been cancelled or changed, or money has disappeared. So is there any advices in general you could give during this situation?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I feel like we're on a bit of a, I don't know how it is. It's obviously different. I haven't been able to see where everyone's from, and I know that everybody is at a really different stage of this process. You know, in terms of when you might have
In
gone into
Texas?
lockdown, when you're starting to emerge from lockdown. Sorry, is there quite a broad range?
Yeah, I think so. We are with Belgium, Texas, Germany, Rhode Island, Tennessee. Yeah, to mention some.
Yeah, so from all over really.
Yes.
So I guess people might be at slightly different stages, but one of the things I was noticing right at the very beginning, when the sort of lockdown phase was kicking off for people, were filmmakers really panicking that they weren't able to connect creatively to their work. And that's really normal. And I think what people really needed to hear at that time was that just try and remove the pressure from yourself to respond creatively, because, you know, as human beings, this is not something that we know how to deal with. And on a neurological level, you know, all the sort of warning signs, the protective things are happening to us mentally and physically. And when your body is in that protective space, or actually because you're in fear, you're afraid of something, you can't be creative. Like, those parts of your brains, there's no space for that. So what you kind of need to do in this moment is just to go a bit inwards and look after yourself, and just really practice that self-care. And by that, I don't mean go out and do all the yoga classes or meditate for 4 hours a day, or, you know, because that in itself can also add pressure, the sort of pressure of you know, I call it the social media noise, but that's what it's felt like to me, is this voice in the back of my head that's going, oh, people are doing all this stuff, they're you know, they're taking up art classes, and they're doing all this yoga, and they're drawing, and they're writing, and all this kind of thing. But that's not it. It's not how everybody copes necessarily. So it's about listening to your responses to things, and if something feels stressful, really trying to minimize that stress.
You said something before, that a lot of people coming to you, they come and you work with self-worth, and I find that very interesting. Could you just give us a picture of what that is and how you work with it, and the symptoms, and give us something, please?
It's really different I think it's really different for everybody, because for some people, challenges with self-worth have been there for a really long time. So going back to childhood experiences, I suppose, and how you felt when you were young, and not really been realizing that you've been grappling with that for a long time. And for other people, it's very much a direct result of working in this industry.
Why?
So
Why is, sorry for interrupting, what mechanisms?
Sorry, I missed that again.
What mechanisms trigger that in our industry?
I think a lot of it is to do with, especially for documentary makers or freelancers who are not paid, who are putting in a lot of time and effort, and the financial return isn't coming in. You know, you could be creating, you've got documentary makers out there who are winning, and this could be true as well, who are winning awards at Sundance or winning Oscars, and they're still not able to pay their mortgage. And so that balance, that doesn't make sense really. You're like, I'm literally at the top of what I can achieve, and yet our society says that when we're there, we should be earning. You know, we should be able to feed ourselves and to pay our mortgage or our rent, and that's not happening for lots of freelancers. But you're also very dispensable. So we work on a kind of system of fear, really, because, you know, if you're not performing, like I was mentioning before, you know, when I was moving into this other world and not wanting to tell people because I didn't seem to not be as ambitious as I felt I needed to be taken seriously. And so I think a lot of people are kind of moving around in this, in not feeling like they can be completely authentic. You know, you're denying parts of yourself, like some parts of your personal life, never talking about your children or your partner, or other parts of your life that are important, because you feel like you can only present the best version of yourself all the time, and that's actually really damaging for our self-worth.
So my next question was actually, because now this is a WIFTI worldwide webinar, and I'm representing WIFT, and I think that a lot of our audience today also represent WIFTs, and or do believe that organizations and to get organized as we do in WIFT is important. What can we do, you think, as groups to create structures that can somehow not take care of all of it, but to help? What's the thing?
It's, yeah, we've been having a lot of conversations like that in the industry, and a lot of the work at the moment feels like it's coming from the freelancers, you know, coming from the bottom, and we're trying to change hearts and minds, if you like, so that by the time it gets through to the top, people are actually listening. But it definitely needs to filter down as well, and it's about creating spaces where people can, I think vulnerability is seen as weak, and it's one of my favorite words. The concept, the idea of trusting someone enough to be vulnerable with them it's a special thing. It's an incredibly rewarding thing to be with someone in that moment, you know.
So what I hear with Sweden, and I'm in WIFT on many levels, both national and international. I think one experience I have from being in WIFT circumstances is that we give each other a space to be and to be vulnerable. I remember during the Me Too, when all the Me Too came up, it also really gave us these spaces where we started to share things that we maybe hasn't shared at all before. I experienced that a lot. Were you active during the Me Too? Had you started as a therapist?
Not quite. It was very much on the cusp of it. Yeah. And you can feel a huge change from that movement.
Yeah. I was curious about that, if you have any certain experiences from that period.
Me personally?
You personally, or as a therapist, or that could be connected to the work you do now? Because what I hear is that you have both your way of being a producer, but also in a bit that how you are a therapist, because you work with so much people from the film industry. So then I'm curious, because the Me Too movement was a big thing in our industry. It was a big thing all over the world, but it started in our industry, and it really made something, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you have seen or experienced.
Yeah, I mean, at a personal level, it's made me really angry, but it's also been very empowering. I mean, I was already going through a process, I think, during my therapy, because you do kind of turn yourself inside out during your training, of growing more confident and knowing myself better, and accepting all of the flaws. things I used to think were flaws, but bringing all of them and saying, no, this is just part of me, and becoming more confident as a woman, you know, of like, yeah, I'm a woman, and I'm a mother, and I'm a daughter, and I'm a, you know, and these are all the things that I need to bring into my work, and I'm not just a producer or a therapist. And I think I've been able to look back at some of those past experiences that I've had, and many women have had, and feel just very rightly that they were not okay. However I'm going to put mild in, however mild they may have seemed, they were not okay. And I'm very sure now that I would never let them happen again. Yeah. And I feel much more confident talking to other people in that, using those words of I hear from clients a lot, they tell me stories and they try and justify why they might have happened, and I will use the words quite clearly of no, that sounds like abuse, or that person went too far, that's not acceptable. And just for somebody else who's not been able to say those words to hear it then enables them to say it themselves.
That's very interesting. I think what time? We have another 5 minutes. Yeah, but I asked you for, or did I, your advice for self-care, because that was the word you used. Use this situation, self-care, not overdo yoga classes and so on. But just what kind of self-care could you advise us all to do?
There's no easy answer to that, because everybody's so individual, and what one person finds soothing, another person finds stressful. So it is about identifying that thing that feels nurturing, and that's, so for me, for example, yoga is one of those things. Yoga is all exercise for me, so it's not necessarily always self-care, but gardening, spending time with family, switching off from work, that's the boundaries between work and actually being able to say, I'm not on right now, even if it's just for an hour. That's been a hugely important change for me, and has affected my stress levels, brought my stress levels down enormously, even as I've been setting up a business. It's been a really big thing, just knowing that there's a separation. There needs to be a separation sometimes. Taking a holiday, cooking, reading, whatever it is that is the thing for you.
I hear the magic of the small things, in a way. Yeah, and another thing I was thinking of, new people coming to our industry, if you should give advices to could be young, or to be young in the industry, not always being young, because you can be a bit older and be new in the industry, but people entering our industry, what would you like to tell them?
I think since I've been doing this, and I've done a few talks with students and emerging filmmakers, it makes me incredibly sad to hear surprise in their voices when I say, when they tell me a story about having been exploited or not appreciated or worked into the ground to a point that they've suffered exhaustion or a breakdown. And when I've turned around and said, that's not okay, there is a different way to be in this industry, that they've looked surprised. And I think that's the biggest thing, is don't accept something that feels damaging to you, to your mental health, to your physical and mental well-being.
That's easy to say, and at the same time, the competition in our industry, and if you really want to be there, you eat a lot of shit. Sorry for but that's, and what can we do to stop that? Because I think it was worse. I've been in this industry since I was 16, and I'm 50 now, so it's for a while, and it's been better. It's better. as I see it, but I still see, I think the stress levels is worse now than it were, but this competition is still there, I think. And it's not easy. How can you tell someone? Because then you have to choose a totally another life if you want to get into it.
I don't know, because I don't know if you do have to choose another life. I think you maybe just have to do it in a different way.
Yeah.
You have to, I guess you have to figure out your level of resilience.
Yeah.
So it's, so that there's jobs that are really hard that you may need to work 15, 20-hour shifts to get through, and that's okay if you feel that you can, if you feel resilient and strong enough to do that, and you've signed up for it, and everybody's working together and they're being kind to each other. I think that's fine. But if there's cruelty involved, or lack of appreciation, or you're doing something where you feel like you're spinning out of control and losing yourself, then the question that you need to ask yourself is, how is this worth it? And I believe that the more of us that do that, the less exploitation there is, because then it's the chicken and egg situation, isn't it? It's like, who starts first? And there's no easy solution to that. But we're losing so many good people from the industry because we're too afraid to challenge, and then people are dropping out from nervous breakdowns and exhaustion. And it's, I just think if we attended more to the mental health needs of people, if we were kinder, if we had a more open ear, and we weren't afraid of the consequences of that, it will take a long time. It's not a quick solution by any means.
No, but I think, but I totally agree, and I think what I've heard. I'm not saying women can't be assholes, because of course we can as well as men can. But my feeling is anyway that I heard that when there is a lot of women on set, it's usually a friendlier atmosphere and more tolerant atmosphere. That's what I heard. Is that anything you have? Now I'm maybe a fiction. I'm not talking about documentaries, because documentaries is a lot of them are made by women. I think the representation of women are higher among documentary filmmakers than among fiction filmmakers.
Yeah.
That's the truth. But I think, talking about fiction, I think my gut feeling, I've heard a lot of witnessing that it's better with women on set. Is that anything I've heard, or?
It's not actually. I mean, I hate to say it, but I can believe it to be true. But I think it's also, the roles in production, they're so traditional, aren't they? It's like we're used to seeing women in certain roles and men in certain roles. And I think there's a real drive to change that, so that it becomes much more diverse. And I think a lot of women working in production, I've heard this phrase and it makes me bristle, but the production mum, which I can't stand. And it's
but I can't say, when they say that the project is your baby, that sucks so much, because it's no, but that's interesting to put in this person. I would like to share a story. We have a Swedish filmmaker, I'm Swedish for those who don't know it, who now, with her latest feature film, that is the third in a trilogy, and it's been shot in Paris, but they decided to shoot 1 week, then have 1 week off, then shoot 1 week and have 1 week off, to make it easier for the people to be parents. And I never heard that before, and it made me so happy that you can also try to structure things in a way so you can live your family life
How beautiful is that?
Yeah, it is.
It's fantastic. Yeah. There's lots of, I think I'm hearing lots of really positive things all the time. So I don't.
Something?
So in the UK, the film and TV charity released a survey at the beginning of this year that basically gave some very damning statistics to the mental health in the film industry. And there's a really big feeling from everyone that we speak to that they can no longer be ignored. It's almost like this platform that we can now stand on to say, actually, you need to have a mental health policy in your production company, because look at these statistics. They're the proof that the industry is very unhealthy. But I was on a podcast this week. It hasn't come out yet, but talking with a woman who's been in the art department of fiction films for years, and she had her own struggles in that world, and has now created the role of a well-being facilitator on fiction sets. So it's a designated person that doesn't have another job to do at the same time, but is solely there to support and signpost people for support when they're struggling. And it's acceptable to go and speak to that person, and you're not going to get fired for it, and and it's just little changes like I'm hearing.
That's very good, but that's what when we were preparing, you told me that you really encourage people to put mental health or therapy in the budget.
Yeah.
So I think we are now we have had our 30 minutes, so I'm happy to, if you're ready to answer some questions. So Regina, do we have any questions?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, we have a few questions, and anyone, write more questions in the chat. Bring them on. We have some time to answer. But we have one question from someone who says, the biggest challenges I've encountered at work these days has been in dealing with egos and big personalities, in quotation marks, within the crew. Any tips on how to keep grounded and keep from getting emotional in the moment when dealing with irrational people?
That's a good question.
That's a really good question.
Yes.
I guess if I answer that maybe from a personal level, is that sort of thing, when I was working predominantly in production, that was the sort of thing that would make me very stressed and very angry, I think, and just sort of I probably get quite ranty about it. I find I do that a lot less now, because egos are really difficult, but I always try to put myself in somebody else's frame of reference and think, what's going on for them that's making them behave that way? And often an ego is there because it's covering up quite a lot of insecurity. Not all the time. Some people just do have them, and it's galling to have to pamper to that. It really is. And I guess it's about finding your own comfort level in how you respond to that person. Is there a way that you can just leave somebody else to deal with the relationship there, or just try and see them in a slightly different way, like what's sitting underneath that bravado, and that ego that they're, I guess, because they feel they're lacking something, so they cover that up in something else often. And I know it sounds really simplistic, but it has helped me, and that it's not anything that I ever discover, because I don't ask people about it. I just kind of recognize it and hold it there as like, okay, so that's their stuff, it's not mine. I don't need to take it on.
But may I add a little question to this? Because how do you manage to do? Because sometimes your feelings can be so dominant, and especially if you get provoked.
Yeah.
A trick for them?
Well, I mean, as a therapist, if I come across that as a therapist, I talk to my supervisor. So that's one thing I haven't mentioned actually, and it's for me, it's my coping mechanism. It's something that in the therapy world you have to have as a supervisor. So I see my supervisor once every 3 weeks, and I just take all my caseloads to him. He's not a filmmaker, which is incredibly refreshing. He knows nothing about the film industry, but he helps me work through ethical implications of certain situations, or exactly, why am I feeling so angry towards this person, or why has this person affected me in this way? And we get to the bottom of my feelings, and it's an incredibly useful thing. And I do, for documentary makers in particular, feel that structure in our working lives would be really beneficial, because I think many of us are working in a very similar way, you know, to a therapist. So for me, that's a long way of saying share that load with somebody. Just recognize it with somebody who can understand, and let the anger out in a healthy way, rather than letting it boil up and then you end up exploding and allowing that other person to turn around and say that you're the one with the problem.
Good point. Do we have more questions?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have one from Belgium, from yours here, who asks, how do you keep yourself motivated? How do you keep yourself motivated while making a film without being paid in pre-production?
That's a very good question too.
It's a really good question. Was that is that a fiction or a documentary? Just out of interest.
She doesn't say. Maybe Yossi, you can write in one of documentary. Okay, cool.
Documentary. Yeah, mostly the way. I find that most people are keeping themselves motivated because at those early stages they're still extremely passionate about the story. And while I appreciate that, and I think that you want to keep hold of that passion and that drive, because that's what helps us make these really beautiful films. I really struggle to accept it, you know, and I think a lot of, and I'm not the only one, I'm not saying that from an idealistic, I'm now a therapist perspective. I'm saying it because everyone else in the industry is saying it too. You know, why are so many of us making films and not getting, there's no value in those pre-production or development phases? I find that you're often having to raise development money when you're pretty much all the way through. You've like shot your entire film, which is really becoming increasingly common. I guess it's about having really honest conversations with commissioners, not defensive conversations, but quite honest conversations about what it's like, because when they are challenged, some commissioners I'm finding are actually able to sit down and work it out with you about, you know, how to make that work. But there's also the really difficult question of maybe we're pushing through too many documentaries that aren't the ones that we should be making. And
that's from the, may I meet you in that, because that's from the structures point of view, because I usually say that the filmmakers are the ground material from the industry. That's the gold. And I had a discussion yesterday with a filmmaker I'm working with, and who struggled with the documentary for 2 years and have not got any funding yet. But now, and lost hope for a while, but then found it again. And I think what made her find it was not thinking of the industry, but thinking of the subject and the story in relation to the world, not in relation to the industry, because this story is really something that she have an urge to bring out because she thinks it's needed. So that's, I don't know how you reflect on that, because the system, of course, has its needs, but sometimes that doesn't correlate with the needs of the storytellers.
I think that moves a little bit into the territory of impact producing, actually, and especially if you've got a film that has a kind of cause behind it, or, you know, there's this real need for the community, a community of people that you're making it for, to be able to see it and use it. I've found with impact is that a lot of the time the work gets left until the film has been made, and actually I wonder how much more rewarding for us as filmmakers it would be if we started that work alongside the development of the film, so that you know that even if you're not going to get broadcast or theatrical, the community work that you're going to do with the film is in place and it will be very meaningful. Because for me, that's where a documentary really comes alive. You know, we go for the broadcast and we go for the big sales and the distribution because that's where the money is, but actually the worth and the quality of a film is in how it connects with the people that you made it for. And so impact producers raise their budget separately to your production budget, so they can actually start that work before you've finished your film in some ways. So maybe it's about bringing that in a little bit earlier.
That would be a good answer to Josje. I see this from Belgium. That's also to have this more than one layer to find your money from.
Yeah.
Thank you for the answer, Rebecca. Do we have something more, Regina?
Yes, we do. Nancy from Tennessee says, for new entrants to the industry, they may not understand triggers that could identify future challenges to their mental health or stability. And please speak to identifying of triggers that could help prepare newbies, in quotation marks, for this. Thanks, Nan.
So the question is about how do we prepare new people coming into the industry to basically not get into unhealthy situations.
Exactly, yeah, and like how you can identify what triggers you, I assume.
Yeah, again, it's not a black and white answer, I guess, because some people are triggered by different things. If I bring it back to documentary, I think often we go to make films about something that we have experience of. So, and we might not always know that, you know, as in we might not be fully aware. It's like, oh, I've had this experience in the past and I'm going to make this film and it's really different to my experience, so it's okay, but actually it's really being motivated by a past thing that you haven't maybe explored fully. And so that's what I think of when I hear the word trigger, because it triggers up a previous trauma that you didn't really know you were carrying. And I think that's quite common with documentary makers, and possibly with, you know, with writers as well, because you write from your personal experience and then you surround yourself with it, and whether it's somebody else's trauma or your own trauma, it can be really, really triggering. And in that, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying make sure that you're supported in that journey, because you could get to the end of the process and it's been incredibly cathartic, but that can be a really hard thing to do on your own without someone to help you process it.
I was thinking of that. Sorry. Yeah.
No, carry on.
No, but I was thinking, how did I survive when I was young? I think to find allies, isn't that the thing? Also, and dare to speak to people that are older than yourself, and to ask questions, and to find friends, because it's a very tough world.
It is, and I guess one of the things that we're not doing at film school that we really should be doing is having these conversations, because I think, there's this misconception that working in film is extremely glamorous and it's going to get you this, that, and the other, and it just isn't. The reality of it is, the reality of it is that it is incredible, and it's art and it's creative, but it needs to have balance.
But that's interesting, I think, because I hope that Nancy is satisfied with the answer. But I think in many other businesses, I think the HR department are much stronger. How people work with management or well-being. My son is working in a bank. They do a lot of things to make people feel good. You never hear about people on a film crew that there are special treatments to take care of people, do you?
No, I don't think so.
Because we expect to have a good time because it's creative, and we have so much feelings that are.
God, you hear on big fiction films that then the crew don't even get invited to the wrap party because they're not considered talent, and it's stuff like that where you just think, where's the family in this? It's you all. I really dislike the concept of hierarchy. That's a massive problem. So it's a reminder as well that remember that you started out as a runner, even if you're now an executive producer, just remember what it was like at the very beginning, and be that person again. As a producer, I would often go out with filmmakers and as a production assistant, so I would be the one handing out bottles of water and not being a producer that day, but looking after people and just boss me around, tell me what to do, because I just think it's so important to
But I think it's culture, and I think sometimes when we discuss in WIFTI circumstances, it's really that we have the opportunity to create a culture, and the normal in our industry to have a very competitive culture that also built on the idea that there is a lack of resources. But if we decide there are no lack of resources, there's tons of resources, maybe not in our industry, but we can also decide to create a culture and have an idea that there is enough for all of us. I think that is somehow the big idea, because as long as we fight about this little cake, let's bake a bigger cake together and create a new world.
That's a nice way to look at it.
But I think that's why I'm engaged in WIFT, because I think we have to work. Change will not come by itself.
Exactly.
So now I had a message from Nancy that she was happy for the answer. Do we have more questions?
Yes, there's one. It's more sort of a comment that you maybe want to reflect on from Lisa Raven. Women bullying other women is rarely spoken about, perhaps because women who attain positions of power don't want to appear soft. We need to teach each other how to be both strong and kind. So it's maybe just something to reflect on for you if you want to.
But I think what I heard is, are you there, Rebecca, or is it frozen right now?
Seems frozen.
Seems frozen.
Yeah.
I think my computer is a bit tighter. But I think what I heard was two things. One is the idea that about women and how women treat other women. And while waiting for Rebecca, I can quote a character in one of my films who said, being a feminist, you're not a feminist just because you're a woman, and just because you're a man doesn't mean you're not a feminist. Talking about feminist in that way, that you have the idea that there should be space for everyone. Rebecca, have we lost you? Yes, I think we have.
You can just keep talking now. I'll try to pick it up.
Yeah, and then I also heard about bullying, and I find that very interesting, and I really would like to ask Rebecca when she's coming back, because a bullying situation can be very delicate, where it's easy, if you're being bullied, it's easy to feel that there is something wrong with you, and then you start with the self-blaming, and maybe maybe you have done something wrong, but that doesn't mean you should be bullied. So it's really delicate situations, and I'm losing my dear Rebecca now. I miss her. Do we know what's happened technically?
No, I can't reach her. No, it seems to just be disconnected. There we are.
Sorry.
Oh, there you are again. Yeah, I've been reflecting on the question. It was not a question, but it was more a comment. But the comment was about women bullying other women. So this thing and the idea about women can't be friends, or bullying as a phenomena. Do you have any reflections on that?
I wish I'd had your reflection.
I can tell you. What I told was a quote from a character from one of my films, The Feminist, and where she said that just because you're a woman doesn't mean you're a feminist. and just because you're a man doesn't mean you're not a feminist. So, how we act is not related to our sex. It's related to how we are and what we do believe in. And being a feminist in this reading is that you believe in a world where there should be the same possibilities for everyone. That's somehow the idea that it was based on. But of course, we have all been treated bad by women, and maybe we have treated people bad ourselves. So doesn't mean women are extra kind, or are we?
I think, I don't want to be overly broad here, but I think society in general teaches us from a very early age to be more nurturing. It's a comfortable place for us to be.
Expectation. That's why we don't. It's so hard to pitch a badass female character, because then people say no, it's normal.
Yeah, exactly. And then if they are considered unemotional women, then you're looking at, the explanation is always that they didn't have a mother, or something like that. And I guess women being unkind to women, again, if you put yourself into somebody else's frame of reference, it's probably their own fear that they've had to work really bloody hard to get where they are, and they're afraid of missing out. They want, it could be that, it could be any number of things. It's normally not because they just want to go through life being unkind. I think it's driven by something much, much deeper than that. But again, it's, how do we just accept that? How do we, we shouldn't have to accept that, but we also shouldn't be afraid of losing our jobs if we challenge it. So it's finding a way to challenge it that doesn't feel
but then it's connected to structural problem, because of course, it's been a fact many times in my life history that if you raise your voice, you have to move on. So that's not unknown about. But I was thinking of another thing that maybe, because we touched bullying, but I was also thinking of difficult people. How do you deal with difficult people?
I wonder how much more the role of a moderator is being used now in the workplace. I think a lot of people are bringing in, I keep hearing this term leadership skills, which I find interesting in terms of teaching people at the top how to be fairer as employers. But I do think that needs to be filtered down a little bit more to just teaching everybody, often I find that it's really bad communication. Difficult people don't know how to communicate what their needs are, and therefore they're very hard to reach. So it's really impossible for us to find out what their needs are, and then it just goes off in this cycle, and that we then are unable to give them what they want, and so they become more difficult, and it's just this loop like that. So how do you fix that communication breakdown?
I have an idea that a moderator from outside coming in, and because that's a little bit what you can do in your work. That was a question I forgot before. As it happens that you had been invited to productions if they have had conflicts to help and solve.
I've talked to a lot of people about that, yes.
Yeah.
I have done some couples counselling with producers and directors.
Oh yeah.
Before. I'm not trained in couples counselling, but I have been personally been at the receiving end of relationships that have been tricky, or I've witnessed it, a lot in my work. So I understand that, being able to see both sides and realizing that the other person is struggling just as much as you are, that we're all kind of breaking slightly under the pressure, is just a really helpful thing. And just to have somebody impartial a safe place to have those conversations is really useful. So yes, I think the same applies for bringing a moderator into a production company, and but that takes quite a lot of bravery, I think, to say we've got a problem here that I can't fix, so I'm going to bring in someone external. And
yeah, it takes some bravery and maybe costs some money, but we also know what it costs with a production that collapses.
Yeah,
that's never cheap.
No, it's not, exactly. And
it's very painful.
Yeah, and we don't need to come out of these projects as best friends. That's not always the goal, but it is about finding out, you know, from each side what the best case scenario looks like. And yeah,
I think we have some questions. I also would like to, we have to do some PR for, you do work online, so it literally means that you're open for customers worldwide. So all of you sitting in the US, you can definitely hire Rebecca if you get any problem in your productions. Do we have a final question?
Yeah, we do. Let's take the final one from Renee. They say, I've worked in the true crime genre a lot over the last 10 years, and with that encounter a lot of vulnerable interview subjects. It's very important to me that my interview subjects feel safe, supported, comfortable, and respected. I go the extra mile to ensure this, but I wonder if you have any tips.
I think that's the first step, isn't it? Being aware that those interviews can be really scary and daunting for people, and taking an effort to create a safe space is really important. So that's the first step, really. What does a safe space look like is always a good question. You know, what's a safe space for one person can be really different for another. So, you know, even in the therapy room, somebody might need to sit with their back to the door, and somebody might find that they can never be comfortable doing that. So if you're talking about even the physical space that you create for somebody in an interview environment, it's really important to check in with that person to find out what that is. Neutrality is really, I think, is really important. Somewhere that they, you know, interviewing somebody in their home is not always a good thing, because there could be triggers all around the home. We're really discovering that as therapists at the moment, working with really vulnerable people whose troubles are actually in the home. So I think that's been a result of a lot of the drop-offs of people coming to us is because it's actually not safe for them to talk there. And the other thing is autonomy. Really, for me, that's the biggest thing. It's like, how do you make that situation feel as equal as it can, so that the person that you're filming with feels in control? Can you imagine if we put ourselves in the shoes of a contributor who doesn't know anything about the film industry at all, what it must be like to have cameras and lights and all these things turn up, to hear you speak, and just the you may have been waiting to share this story for a really long time, like nobody may have asked before. So it's an enormous deal, and you want to feel that person, A, you know, they really need to be heard, but B, they need to feel that they can stop at any time, and that they have control over that situation, because it's it can feel really wobbly to give up your private information. I think one of the things I've said to emerging filmmakers in particular quite a lot is that we don't have a right to somebody's story. It's a privilege when somebody chooses to share it with us. We never have a right to somebody's information, so just be gentle, and you know, they will share it with you if they want to. They'll decide how deep they want to go. Does that help?
That was fantastic. I hope so, but I think it was a fantastic answer, and it was a very good final of this lovely conversation. So I'm so happy that you gave us this hour of your life, Rebecca, and thanks a lot for that. And I can give you the applause. The other
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. The rest of you, I hope you will come back to the WIFTI Worldwide webinar and sign up to the WIFTI newsletter on wifti.net. Wifti.net, under newsletter, you can sign up for the WIFTI newsletter. We will send out a new one in the next couple of days where we will announce the 3 upcoming webinars. Next one will be next week from Australia, then we go to India, and finally we will end up in LA in June. So thank you everyone, and once again, thank you, Rebecca.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.